Why ride-sharing apps like Uber are actually good for everyone. Imagine a world where you can't easily get a ride after a night out with friends, or where traveling to a new city means struggling to communicate with cab drivers who don't speak your language. This was the reality before the rise of ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft. But here's the thing. These apps aren't just a minor convenience. They've had a profoundly positive impact on American life. And yet, some people still think they're a bad thing. But here's where it gets controversial. What if the real problem wasn't the apps themselves, but the outdated regulatory systems they disrupted? Let's dive into the story of how ride-sharing apps changed the game, and why they're actually a force for good. Before we get started, we want to introduce two new members of the Slow Boring team. Caroline Sutton, our assistant editor, and Helena Bennett, our writing fellow. Caroline comes to us from the Tony Blair Institute in London, where she edited policy and politics content and has a background in U.S. politics and foreign policy. Helena is a journalist who's written for the New York Times and has a passion for exploring how policy shapes people's lives. When Uber first launched in D.C. in 2011, it was hailed as a clever way to get around municipal taxi regulations, and it's true. The app's GPS technology and user-friendly interface made it a game-changer for getting around cities. But what's often overlooked is the fact that Uber's real innovation was in disrupting the existing taxi cartel. For years, the taxi industry had been dominated by a handful of powerful companies that controlled the market and kept prices high. Uber came in and shook things up, offering a more efficient and affordable way to get around. And this is the part most people miss. The old taxi system was broken, and Uber's disruption of it was a good thing. Of course, not everyone sees it that way. Some critics, like Hillary Allen, argue that Uber's success is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked corporate power. But is that really fair? After all, the taxi industry was never exactly a bastion of competition and innovation. In fact, it was often characterized by high prices, limited availability, and poor service. Uber changed all that, offering a more convenient, affordable, and efficient way to get around. And the data bears this out. Studies have shown that Uber has reduced drunk driving deaths, increased consumer surplus, and even helped to reduce discrimination in the taxi industry. So why do some people still think Uber is a bad thing? Part of the answer lies in the way we think about economic policy. For too long, we've been stuck in a mindset that sees the world as a zero-sum game, where one person... In reality, life is full of trade-offs, and good economic policy recognizes this. The study of economics emphasizes the importance of competition, innovation, and efficiency. It recognizes that successful entrepreneurs don't just get rich by exploiting others, but by creating value and solving problems. And it understands that regulatory policy can have unintended consequences, like raising prices and reducing availability. The law and political economy movement, on the other hand, often takes a more pessimistic view of the economy. It sees the world as a battlefield, where powerful corporations and wealthy individuals are constantly trying to exploit and oppress others. And it argues that the only way to stop this is to impose stricter regulations and controls on the economy. But is this really the right approach? After all, the taxi industry was heavily regulated, and it was still a disaster. Maybe the problem isn't that we need more regulation, but that we need to rethink our approach to economic policy altogether. The term political economy has a long and fascinating history. It was first used by French scholars in the 17th century and was later adopted by classical economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo. For a long time, it simply meant the study of economic policy without any particular ideological connotations. But over time, the term has taken on a more specific meaning, particularly on the left. Today, political economy often refers to a critique of mainstream economics and a call for a more radical and interventionist approach to economic policy. The Law and Political Economy Project, in particular, argues that regulators should stop caring about economic analysis and focus more on social and political considerations. But is this really the right way to think about economic policy? Don't we need to take economics seriously, rather than just dismissing it as a tool of the powerful? The example of Uber is a great illustration of this debate. On the one hand, you have critics like Hillary Allen, who see Uber as a cautionary tale about the dangers of corporate power. On the other hand, you have defenders like me, who see Uber as a force for good, a company that has increased competition, innovation, and efficiency in the taxi industry. So who's right? Well, I think the data speaks for itself. Uber has been a huge success and has made a real difference in people's lives. It's increased consumer surplus, reduced drunk driving deaths, and even helped to reduce discrimination in the taxi industry. Of course, there are downsides to Uber, like increased traffic congestion. But these are the kinds of trade-offs that we need to think carefully about, rather than just dismissing the company as a whole. Because when we're talking about Uber, we're not just talking about a company, we're talking about a whole way of thinking about economic policy. Do we want to prioritize competition, innovation, and efficiency? Or do we want to focus on social and political considerations? Do we want to take economics seriously, or do we want to dismiss it as a tool of the powerful? These are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking ourselves as we think about the future of economic policy. So what do you think? Do you think Uber is a force for good or a cautionary tale about the dangers of corporate power? Let us know in the comments. And if you're interested in learning more about the debate over economic policy, be sure to check out our other articles on the topic.